Hello, everybody. How's everybody feeling?
Great.
Good, very curious, I hope, because we've got some great guests, as you heard, and we're going to get right to it. So, both of you had your companies long time ago. We're talking legacy companies at this point, before the dot-com bust even. Like, that's 16 years ago now, it's hard to believe. Before the word startup was something we throw around every day, and certainly before the word disruption was even a thing. So, I want you to briefly tell us your major stories of disruption, because they're too good not to hear, even though a lot of us probably already know. Let's start with you, Harry. You had your company founded even before 9/11. You were in your girlfriend's apartment with how many employees?
Two.
Two.
Well, I went from 50 down to two.
And then what happened?
And then I was unsure whether she wanted to marry me, because when she met me, I had 50 people working for me, and I was in this cool loft space in Tribeca, and I was venture funded. And then I wasn't. And so then she had to figure out whether all the shine of being sort of this 20-something startup tech guy in Tribeca was still a reality that she wanted to be involved with. But thankfully, we've been married now for 15 years. So
we all know
it's
the
worked
story
out.
ends happily. But tell us,
kids later.
You got up the day after 9/11.
So I started the first, so the company I founded first, I guess the first iteration, I was in Los Angeles. I had always been bitten by the startup bug. I was computer science undergrad and actually switched to government, but always sort of spent my summers either working for Intel and its venture group or working for BCG and its tech and media practice, or actually even took a year off to work for a startup trying to do interactive television in Philadelphia. So I was always focused on building something great from the ground up. And really didn't know the space that I wanted to be in. And as I was working for one of the portfolio companies that I was involved with at Intel, I realized that mobile was really where I wanted to make my contribution. Didn't know what or how, but felt that, since it was so nascent and the internet was just starting to come onto those devices, I thought that within at least 3 or 4 years of 1999, it would be the year of mobile. And so if I got in early, I would be successful. By 2003, everybody would, of course, be using their mobile phone for everything. I was about 8 years too early.
Too soon.
But in any event, I was able to convince a professor from Columbia to leave Columbia to co-found it with me, as well as a user interface designer from who had won 3 Emmys for his work for NBC for the Time Warner Full Service Network. And we were able to raise money. At that time, it was really easy. You could sort of could throw a paper airplane and it would hit a VC and they would give you money. I mean, it was pretty great times then. And ended up sort of not really having a business model, trying to build mobile, beautiful sort of mobile sites for operators, really powering the portal. And the lead time to actually get a contract done with the operators was typically 2 years. Mm-hmm. And you don't have enough money to go through a 2-year sales cycle with operators. And as the tech bubble burst and we couldn't raise another round of funding, dream was over, and I had to figure out how I was going to pick up the pieces of my life.
Exactly. So the theme today is destruction and resilience. So clearly that glowing portrait that you painted of a company that really seemed prophetic had its ups and downs in many iterations. We're going to get to some of those iterations. Jessica, at the time, you also had founded your company.
Yeah, 2001.
Exactly.
Very different founding story than
Very
Harry's.
different founding story when 9/11 happened and then the dot-com bust happened. You were in India already sort of outsourcing your game developing to Indian.
Yeah, the company's taken very many twists and turns, as any company that's been around for as long as either of ours have been will do. But yeah, it was a different time. I think I probably came from a different strain than Harry did. I went to Wellesley for art history. I was not thinking about tech. I was not thinking about entrepreneurialism. I don't think most people were at that time. And so when Kenny, my husband and co-founder, and I started our business, it was 2001. The first tech bubble had burst. Getting money was not an option. I mean, even if we had wanted it, which I think we initially did and then later decided we didn't, it just wasn't an option for us. So, it's kind of the classic entrepreneur's story. said, well, we have about $8,000 in savings and some 401ks, and we'll get $500 from our parents. And of course, couldn't pay ourselves. So the only thing we could afford to do was to find someone who we could pay, who could, develop software for us for what we had at the time, $10,000. And we found that in India initially. But yes, we were there when 9/11 happened. So we really started our business kind of at the low point of.
I took out the inflation calculator earlier, and well, I was using 15,000 because that's what had been quoted. So say roughly around 15,000. That's only $20,000 now. Could somebody do what you're doing now with $20,000?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you absolutely can. It's just a matter of your attitude and your will, and I think that it has been put in the minds of so many people at this point that they need to raise insane amounts of money to be successful. And I just don't think it's true. I think just a little bit of ingenuity and grit and hard work will get you there.
Like time, sacrifice, and focus.
Okay, so we'll get to the money part in a second because I know you bought out some early angels in 2008 and you have raised a little bit of money, but it took you, 14 years to get there?
Yeah.
But between 2001 and now, there was another crisis.
Yes, and so many crises along the way, but the big daddy crisis.
Yeah, Crimea.
Was in Crimea. So, we ended up moving away from India at some point. Found developers in Ukraine, in Crimea, which is in the southern region of Ukraine. Steadily built that business from 6 to over 100 people over the course of 8 years. And then in 2014, the riots started happening in Kiev, and we weren't overly concerned because it was very, very far away. And literally the next thing we knew, we woke up one morning and the tanks were rolling through this city, Simferopol, Crimea, which we thought we were probably the only Americans who had actually ever heard of it.
And a few months later, you were actually conducting illegal activity, according to the U.S.
Yeah, well, we never did, but but yeah,
would have been if you had continued.
But yeah, so long story short, the region gets annexed by Russia. We spend 6 months going from being a Ukrainian company to all of the craziness that is becoming a Russian company. So you're staying in the same place, but your country has changed around you. So citizenship, papers, all of the corporate stuff that has to happen, currency, just crazy stuff that you could never imagine. And once all that was finished, we found out by looking on the internet randomly on, I think it was December 19th, that the United States had sanctioned American companies in the region. So we weren't allowed to operate there legally anymore. You would think you'd get like a certified mail or something.
Yes.
Like what you're doing is instantly illegal. No, we just kind of had to stumble upon it. And then I think it was the next day or 2 days later, the American government, shut for the holidays, and the Russian government shut for the holidays. So we were kind of left with this internet story that basically said you're no longer allowed to do business, and that's it. If you wire any money there, if you speak to your employees, if you try and get code out, you'll go to jail for up to 25 years. And
your employees were waiting for pay, as well as the Christmas bonus, as well as party money, and you were talking about a whole new currency at this point.
Yes.
Okay. So, how do you get up the next day? And Harry, you've been through about 4 iterations at this point in terms of what you actually do as a company. When you get a setback, and I memean that's a major one. Not many people are going to have the home country of their developers, invaded. We hope. But when you get up the next day, do you just want to put the covers back over your head? And how do you fight against that?
Well, I use the term existential change, as in if you don't change, you don't exist. So you change. One of the things that you realize is that, and I think both our companies are the same way in that, without a lot of venture funding, you have a very clear understanding of what you need to do to make money. And you don't really have an option to go a month or two without collecting money because you have to pay people. So unless you go and raise outside money, ultimately what you need to do is focus on how you're going to operate your business on a cash positive basis, not even on a profitable basis, but on a cash flow positive basis, so that you can actually make payroll and make sure that all your employees are paid on time. And I think that is a much harder way to run a company. It requires much more discipline, and it requires actually being much more patient. The timelines to starting a profitable company that has to be profitable every day of its existence are very different than starting a venture-backed company, because the risks that you are allowed to take are fewer and farther between, and you have to be much more steady state in terms of how you grow that company. And so, when we went through these sort of iterative changes, we were building software for operators. That clearly wasn't going to work. We then got into a rev share model with our operators, where we ended up, we found that they would be willing to do rev share deals with us and pay us, but they weren't willing to do software sales deals and pay us. Mm-hmm. Don't know why, but big difference in terms of sort of the perception around those business models. And then you were able to, because they had no ability to license content and build content, I became one of the largest sort of ringtone image and game providers in the US by actually offering ringtones, images, and games via all the operator portals. So if you remember, for those of us in the room that had flip phones, that's how you got all your content. And basically, if you went on the operator, if you got a photo or a wallpaper from AT&T, that was probably me.
Probably for you. Which was a big thing for a while.
It was a big thing.
And now
Paid the bills.
it's something completely different.
Gone. That business is gone.
You've effectively had 4 different businesses. Now you're exclusively mobile advertising, and the setup for that and a marketplace for that is what you're trying to get into now, right?
So the interesting thing about that was that at the same time that we had the ringtone image and game business, we also realized that subscriptions were, I like making money when you're sleeping. Like, the idea is that if I'm sleeping and there's a way that somebody could sign up and actually buy more services, that's a great thing. And I also like the idea of recurring revenue. I think if you have to earn it every single time, that becomes really difficult. So we introduced basically content services on a subscription basis. If you could subscribe on your flip phone to Spin Magazine or Vibe Magazine or Rolling Stone, there was some ringtones associated with it, but for the most part, for $2.99 a month, you could read music reviews, you could get content. We didn't get a huge number of people signed up, maybe 20,000 to each of those content services. But what we did have is this recurring revenue stream, 20,000 subscribers times $2.99 a month divided by 50, because 50% goes to the operator, 50% goes to us. Then obviously we have to split it back with the publisher. That model actually worked really well, and that got us into building the sites and apps for major media companies. And then lo and behold, the iPhone comes out and we're like, we're dead. And that was that's equivalent to your Crimea story, where instantaneously you have the carrier ecosystem where you could put a bill on the carrier bill and you get paid your $2.99. And overnight, the iPhone comes out 1.0 in 2007.
So do you get better at changing, Jessica? I mean, so for example, Harry's company has gone towards mobile, always has been. Yeah. Your company actually is getting out of mobile, has gotten out of mobile and has gone the other direction.
Yeah.
Do you get better at deciding, okay, this isn't working, throw out that business plan and start fresh?
I do think if there's kind of a silver lining to stories like this, or existential changes, as Harry referred to them, it is that you really get down to the core of what it is that you can be great at, that you can be number 1 or number 2 at, and everything else that's not potentially revenue generating or doesn't have the potential to be in the near future. When you're a company like ours, that's ours is a minority share, less than $5 million. So it's not like this massive cushion that we had as a business, especially going through something like we did. So yeah, always been focused on revenue and profitability. And I think when your focus is there, when you do go through something like this, you have to, it actually becomes easier to make those hard choices, because it's just a question of survival.
Now you still have the most played game in the world was 600 million.
There's something like 600 million people have it installed on their desktop. It comes pre-installed with every Windows operating system.
But gaming is really part of your past at this point.
Yeah. So we've continued to evolve. And we took a couple of years there where we heavily invested in mobile apps and mobile games, because that's where the industry was going. What we found, it was just really, really difficult to stand out in a very crowded market, and very, very difficult to monetize. There's only a handful of Farmvilles on Facebook or Pokemon Go's on mobile. You don't really hear the story of the hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of other apps that languish in the App Store and never make a dime, let alone their money back. So when all this happened in Crimea, we took a real hard look at the business, what was making money, what had the potential to make money, and we decided that was something we had to exit.
and you went then, tell us what you went towards and what you're building now.
Sure.
It's quite exciting.
So we've really evolved as a business with our roots still in gaming, but in much like Harry's business, we work with all of the major publishers in the United States and many of them in Europe. And our goal is really to create really interactive, engaging content that's a two-way conversation between the end reader and the piece of content that we're creating, so that the stories more come alive. So interactive polls, quizzes, maps of the United States, stuff about the elections, really kind of gamified experiences around the news.
Okay, and I just want to throw out a few numbers. So you have about 120 employees at this point.
Yeah, a little less.
It's fluctuated, right? And how many employees do you have now?
We're just under 250.
250, right? Yeah. In terms of revenue, you're bringing in, well, you brought in 100 million last year. You say
Almost
you're growing
that,
at
yeah.
double digits. You won't give us an exact figure, but it's somewhere between...
It's very exciting. I mean, one of the
I mean, I'm going to say 150, hopefully.
That's
Is that what
ballpark.
you're looking for? Ballpark?
Ballpark. One of the exciting things about having a business that's grown as we've grown is that not only are you focused on the existing business, but you're also, because of that history, you're always worried about whether the existing model is going out of business as well.
Yeah.
And so, we have a 70-person product and engineering team. And I would say of that 70 people, 50 people are working on future-looking products, because we realize that if we don't disrupt ourselves, somebody will disrupt us, especially given that we're in a particular position in the market where we probably drive, I don't know if the majority is the right word, but we drive a large portion of the brand advertising on mobile devices across all the largest media companies.
Will you ever take money? You bought out your early investors back in 2008. You were saying at a 6% interest rate, which now looks fantastic. It looked fantastic to them then, but you're very pleased about it. Would you ever raise money now?
It's one of those things where large private growth and private equity companies have come through our door and looked at our financials with our EBITDA margins.
20% you said, right?
Somewhere around there. And
not quite 20%.
Actually, probably more than that.
Okay.
There's not very many companies that have been able to establish the growth that we've been able to establish that have the profitability that we have. Usually growth and profitability are sort of inversely related. I think all of the discipline that we've implemented into the company over the 8 years previous where we were floundering, having that as a history and understanding that it could go negative very quickly has helped us really be very careful about our investments and make sure that every element of the company, as we decide to add headcount, needs to play some role, some major role in the success or the future, or what we truly believe is the future success of the business.
Yeah, and I mean, that's a deadly serious point, because at some point it's, beyond the point of no return, right, Jessica? Or is it? I mean, you raised money, 14 years after, so what would that have been, 2012,
13.
13,
yeah.
You raised
$5 million.
For about 20% of the company?
A little less, yeah.
Mm-hmm. That was your Series A?
Yes.
Would you be looking to raise more? I mean, well, tell the story of the Microsoft contract first, because I was wondering whether getting something like that is a blessing or a curse. The Walmart effect. People want Walmart to order from them, but suddenly they do, and they're overwhelmed, and the margins go down to zero.
It's been an absolute blessing for us. Our mission, we're a very mission-driven company. Our mission is to deliver fun to millions, and I see our relationship with Microsoft is allowing us to live our vision and our mission every single day. So anytime you can have a client that pays you on time and gets you great exposure and gives you creativity and freedom and gives you exposure to 600 million people, that's A-okay by me.
Now that came about because RJ Reynolds called you up one day out of the blue
Yes.
and said, do you happen to have a game that we can put on our website? And you didn't, but you said you did.
Correct. So we sort of did. We sort of did. So this is back in the early hustle days before we were profitable, when it was just 3 of us in an office with barely any revenues, and we were lucky enough that some of the developers that we had been working with had developed amazing multiplayer poker software, and so we were iterating on it and making it better. And this is back in the day when poker was a really probably nobody in this room remembers, but back in like 2003, 2004, poker became like a thing, that it was on television and stuff. It was very odd. But suddenly everybody wanted poker. And we were one of the few companies that had it and hadn't kind of taken it offshore and done gambling around, like real money gambling around it. So yeah, it was a great experience, because I think that, and I'm sure Harry has a million examples of this too, but I'm always amazed that there are these times in your business, when you've been growing a business as long as we have, where you really think like, oh shit, I don't think that we can go to work tomorrow. Like, I don't think there's anything there anymore. And one phone call can literally change the course of your life and the course of your business. And that was the phone call we got from them saying, "This is R.J. Reynolds Tobacco Company. Do you have poker software?" And we said, "Yes, sir, we do."
So the lesson here, folks, is that not only do you need a little bit of luck, perhaps from time to time, but that it's okay to lie sometimes.
I think you have to have a little bit of luck, but you also have to be smart enough to recognize when you are getting lucky and hold on and make it happen. Regardless of what's going on around you, you've got to grab the opportunity.
Have either of you had to give advice to peers who were also trying the same things as you and didn't make it, didn't get that phone call, did have that sinking feeling, couldn't make the payroll, and had to shut up shop?
I mean, ad tech is a graveyard of companies. I mean, sadly, ad tech is probably the hardest single area. Everybody. Lots of friends who are in technology in general, but mostly people in New York who are in finance or not like tangentially even involved in tech at all, are like, "Oh, you have this tech company and it's big revenue, so it's $1 billion." And I'm like, "Well, you have no idea how depressed ad tech is." I'm in the one area of the tech ecosystem that is completely like, we're the garbage pail of tech from a valuation perspective. I think ad tech is really interesting because it solves a fundamental problem, which is that people's eyeballs are shifting from that of television and traditional media, radio, to that of digital, and specifically in digital mobile. And with that migration of people to this device, getting ads onto that device in a format that captures people's attention is a really, really hard technical problem. And solving that problem is a fundamentally important component of just how the
Where
world
will it
works.
end, Harry? I mean, you have to compete against behemoths at this point, and it's easy, quote unquote, for them to have a unit that's dedicated to something that your company does in its entirety. Will there eventually be sort of two advertising giants, just like there was in the old, the Mad Men era?
Well, there is today. I mean, in mobile, for every new dollar, basically Facebook and Google takes 85 cents of every dollar. But that's because they've made it so easy to buy. I mean, one of the stats that's really fascinating to me is that I could throw by show of hands, if you look at Facebook and brand and all the CMOs coming out, what percentage of revenue does Facebook make from brands? And when I say brands, I mean every dollar they make from the large Omnicom and Publicis and WPP, and every large brand, from a P&G to Coca-Cola to Walmart to AT&T. What percentage of their revenue do you think that is? Just by show of hands. More than 50%? Want to raise? More than 70%? More than 90%?
Wait, it's different people raising their hands each time.
So crazy enough, it's about 25%. They announced that they have 4 million advertisers, and there's only maybe, it's the Inc. 500, so there's 500 major brands. And the reality is 75% of their money comes from startups that are venture funded, that are trying to get apps downloads, and small and medium-sized business. And so when you really think about, to your question about sort of the ecosystem and two big behemoths, is what dollars are they capturing? They actually, from a major revenue perspective, from major media companies, they capture a lot, don't get me wrong, but they don't capture as much as people think.
Which is
Well,
excellent
there's an
for you.
opportunity
Yeah.
for an opening.
Jessica, what about you? And obviously
And the
your husband.
graveyard.
We don't want to forget about your husband. Where is he? Put up your hand, Kenny.
There's the husband.
Okay, Kenny is now president. He used to be CEO, but he decided, or both decided, in fact, that they should swap roles. And Kenny, you don't get to speak tonight because of that. Anyway. And we're happy that you're speaking, Jessica. So, what about your competitors? And
I think the gaming graveyard is probably down the block and up the street and twice the size of maybe the ad tech graveyard. No, it's very similar. I mean, we've seen. I can't even count how many companies have gone under in the time that we've been in business. And I think the difference is that the companies that survive like ours were really run by entrepreneurs as opposed to what I would call kind of specialists or hobbyists. People who are extremely passionate about gaming were the people who couldn't see, I think, the forest through the trees. And
when do you
survive.
Give up on an idea? Like, how long do you hold on to an idea or an iteration before you decide, okay, tomorrow is the day we do not do that business anymore? That is not our
always
business.
Too long. And that's something that I try to improve upon every single day, but it's always too long.
Is there a way of recognizing when it's over?
I think what I've learned is that if I wake up every day and have the same thoughts about something and kind of cringe when I think about it, and I allow that to go on for a month, that it's probably over. That's the only way that I can say it, I mean, you can look at the books and you can look at your balance sheet and obviously there's harbingers of if something's going to go well or not, and we all live in a very data-driven environment at this point, so you can really guess very easily and very quickly if something is kind of going the right way or not. But for me personally, still a lot of it does come down to gut instinct and feelings about a certain thing over a certain period of time, and whether those feelings remain sustained or whether they go away.
Harry, a month of that sinking feeling in your stomach?
Yeah, we have this concept of there's signals and there's noise. Signals are actually things that the market's telling you better change, and noise is also signals, but it may not necessarily be from the market, or it may be very short-lived. And so it's always hard to discern what are the true signals that are telling you that you need to change, and what is the noise that telling you a message, but that message isn't commonsensical, for lack of a better term. And so when we talk about signals and noise, the hard part about that is that most people in the market as it is today, if you take a snapshot, don't really have good judgment as to where the market's going to be 6 to 12 months. And obviously I was way too early. I was 8 years too early from hitting sort of our inflection point. But when I look at that, I had sort of this internal fire that I basically was like, I know the mobile phone is going to be important. And I know that there's going to be data services on it, and I know that there's going to be media on it, and that world hasn't been invented yet, and there's going to be a place for myself there. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of people who got into mobile around the time that I did, and even I would say in 2003, 2004, 2005, they hung around for 3 years, and they're like, maybe it's not, or it's not going to happen in the amount of time that I want to put into this, and I've got to go and do something else with my life. So having that, I guess, fortitude to really feel strongly about what's going to be, and then sort of move where the puck is, for lack of a better analogy. That is so important, I think, for any entrepreneur, because basically without that fortitude, it's really easy to just get down on what you're doing because you're not seeing it pick up in the time frame that you actually thought it was going to happen.
But it can also be really dangerous on the flip side. I think to be a successful entrepreneur, you have to have an exceptional locus of control. You have to basically believe I will forcefully get this done regardless of what's going on around me, regardless of what the market says. The market is stupid. I'm brilliant. I'm an entrepreneur, right? You have to have that kind of a little bit of insanity to be able to wake up and do what you do every single day. And that can be very dangerous because you can very easily delude yourself into thinking that something that is amazing that's really just not amazing.
You're very committed to New York. I mean, you both are, but you also had Canada and now the Sochi region of Russia. Now Canada's gone Sochi. Could you do everything you're doing just in New York, or do you need to outsource it to places where it's maybe a little cheaper to hire?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think of it as outsourcing. I think of us as being a multinational corporation that just so happens to have more of our employees in Russia. These are people who we've built relationships, and they have the same style office, they have the same perks, they have the same professional development path that we do. They are our official employees. So I always kind of wince a little bit when I think of it as outsourcing. I happen to think of it as kind of diversification of our employee base. Could we do it all in New York? I guess so. But then I wouldn't get to travel as much.
That's true. and what about San Francisco? I mean, you both, I mean, there's other reasons I'm sure why you're in New York, but you made some great comments to me earlier about San Francisco and how, you know, it's a little bit more unusual to be a startup in New York than San Francisco. Does that mean that San Francisco will hurt sooner, or is already feeling the hurt?
I mean, for me, I have no desire to open an office in San Francisco. I think it's ultra competitive, and it's very, very difficult. And I don't, frankly, want to play that game. The values that my businesses are based on are very, very different than what I think of as San Francisco values, if I can say that.
Do elaborate.
I do think, you know, it goes to what we were both kind of speaking about, and I think how we desire to run our businesses, which is not growth for the sake of growth. And, you know, we've got the long game in mind. Mm-hmm. And I think the mentality in San Francisco, at least for the last 8 years or so, has been very different, which is, you know, you grow fast and you grow big and you exit. As a result of that, the byproduct of that is that you have people who are looking for that and looking for that in the next year to 2 years. And if they don't find a company that's going to give them that, it's very uninteresting to them. So I happen to think my company would probably, as an end result, be sort of uninteresting, right, to people.
And just to mention, I think you said you're up to 15 million in annual revenue now?
Can I take a from his playbook and say somewhere between 10 and 100?
I think I've given away a little bit too much for that. It's a little too late. And what about you, Harry?
So we're in Chicago, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Dallas, and we just opened our London offices this year, which is really interesting, exciting challenge, and especially trying to replicate business models when you go into Europe. You know, I love visiting San Francisco. We have a number of partners there. You know, we have a smaller, thriving office there, and that office is growing. Our Los Angeles office is actually quite big because more of the ad and ad buyer community is in Los Angeles than San Francisco. In our Chicago office, we have like 50 people in Chicago. And it's actually really inexpensive and a really interesting place to run a company just because it's so overlooked, I think, from a talent perspective. But with regard to New York, it's my first love. You know, this is the city. I worked for Intel out in the Valley. I was living in Santa Clara, and it was really boring. And there was no culture, and there was no real design. When you actually look at innovation, and you look at creativity here, and you look at influences, I went to this Future of Storytelling event yesterday on Staten Island. And you know, I had this really interesting conversation with, like, I guess one of the foremost architects in the world, and he's going to come in and give a talk in my company and talk about like how he approaches design and how he comes up with ideas for his buildings. And being in sort of ad tech, especially around design and trying to generate creativity, especially as it comes to new formats and mobile, having those influences and that creative inspiration in the office around my people. I think that's really hard to do in San Francisco. I think some of that exists, but I don't think that San Francisco is anywhere near what New York is in terms of sort of that innovation around design and thoughtfulness around creativity.
Well, before I throw it out to the audience, I do want to ask, you both lived the dot-com bust the first time around. Any echoes now? I mean, obviously, well, who knows? I'm not going to say we're not headed for some kind of bust, but do you see anything familiar? Harry, I'll start with you.
Well, I think very different from back then. There's not really any companies that aren't valued upon revenue and profitability. The expectations around Google and Facebook, and you know, I think part of the reason why you're seeing Twitter suffer a little bit is just that lack of profitability in the business. When you have businesses like Apple that have grown the way that they've grown and put up profits the way they put up profits, there's something tangible and real there. Maybe the valuation is high. That's arguable. You know, that's a debate that you can have with somebody. But there's no question that the enterprise value of an organization like that, in terms of just the total amount of revenue it's generating and even profits that it's generating, and the amount of capital it has sort of sitting on its balance sheet that it can deploy. I mean, that's very, very unlike 2001. Now, the question really is what's that multiple from a valuation perspective? What's the right multiplier on on EBITDA and on profits, and what's the growth potential of that company. And that's really sort of the question of whether there's a unicorn or not a unicorn, and whether things are overvalued or not. But even like an Uber, when you look at it, the business is generating huge amounts of revenue, unlike the first .com bust.
Jessica, anything to add? I know there's a lot there that you'd probably repeat.
Yeah, I mean, the echoes that I see are definitely in more surrounding kind of employee benefits and company culture, if you will. I happen to think that's sort of a good thing, because I think it makes companies that would naturally be kind of evil better, just because they have to compete, because they know that employees have a choice of where they want to go and where they want to work. But definitely, the catered lunch every single day, the shuttles back and forth, these, I think, really insane perks that a lot of these companies are doing is something that will probably start to slow down once there's a little bit more normalcy. And I do think that the valuations are coming a little bit down, but they still were very, very high. Some based purely on user growth, some with revenue. But I do think that there'll be certainly not another bust like we saw before, but maybe a little bit more of a normalizing, if not a correcting. Yeah.
Did you both have mentors? Is it absolutely necessary to have somebody that will tell you straight out where you're going wrong? And could you have saved time maybe as well by having a mentor? I mean, was there a year or two that you sort of wasted or lost along the way?
Kenny and I had a mentor, Strauss Zelnick. He's the chairman of Take-Two Interactive. He's been hugely helpful to us. But he runs a very different type of business, and he's a very type of business person than we are. So I think part of being a great business person, entrepreneur, is knowing when you ask and what to ask, and the value that you will get from that person based on their perspective, and understanding where you have to go it alone. The decisions you have to make on your own.
Harry?
I haven't really had very many mentors. Would have liked to have more along the line, and to your point, I feel like I burned 8 years of my life trying to get to the point where we started growing. So, there's a lesson to be learned there in terms of just, when do you make a decision to not do what you're doing anymore? It was very funny going back to sort of the start of the conversation. I said to what is now my wife, that if I didn't have the company working in a more, I guess, positive way by March of 2008, then I'd go and get a finance job or something along the lines in New York City. And I didn't really, and I kept on going, and it created a little bit of friction. And thank God I did. I stuck with it because I saw the opportunity. But sometimes, if I, looking back on it, had I had a little bit more help and maybe people to open a few more doors, maybe I would have been able to get a little closer to where I needed to be in March of 2008.
All right. With that, I think it is time to throw it out to the audience. You've heard a lot tonight about resilience and destruction. So let's get the question started. Yes.
I just wanted to go back to Twitter versus Facebook, and feel free to not answer this question, but we all wonder what really went wrong with Twitter. Not that it's going wrong, we wouldn't know for the next 2 years, but assuming that it did go wrong, what are the lessons that you think we might learn from looking at it? I build businesses in both the Bay Area and in New York, and I totally relate to what you are talking about. So what is that breaking point that makes a company profitable and successful that a founder should not miss?
Well, here's the interesting thing. I think Twitter and Facebook both had a huge amount of momentum behind the businesses, and as they were growing users, both of them were growing users at a pretty extraordinary clip, which makes them the unique companies that they are and why everybody talks about them, and where they got all this free advertising because everybody put their Twitter and their Facebook handle. The only difference between, I would say, those two companies, and it's not an obvious difference in the way that you would think, but the big difference between those two companies is that whether it was Cheryl or whether it was Mark or it was the people on their ads team, maybe Andrew Bosworth or one of the guys there, but they basically said, we need to disrupt and change how we're making money. And when people raised their hands earlier about how Facebook makes money, what they basically realized was that while they needed to build a direct sales force, which they did, and they have an amazing David Fisher and Carolyn Everson build that direct sales force, at the same time they used technology to basically build a way to make it really easy for small and medium-sized businesses to actually be able to buy Facebook. And so between their ads API and Facebook Exchange or the Facebook network, they were able to actually start to capture dollars, programmatic dollars and small and medium-sized business dollars by having this self-service interface. That led to their extraordinary growth because they were able to bring on 4 million advertisers. If you think about it, that's an extraordinary business into itself. When I look at my business at whatever I'm doing this year, north of $100 million, I have 200 advertisers, and they're the 200 very large advertisers, but it's only 200 advertisers. If I could actually monetize 4 million advertisers or even 200,000 advertisers, the difference in terms of just the scope of revenue that comes into the business and the scale of the business would be, monumentally different. And so that's obviously the lesson that I took away from that, and how I'm changing my business going forward into the future will hopefully make that happen. But that's the big difference. Twitter never figured that out. They bought a company called MoPub, which was supposed to do that, and it never really got well integrated into Twitter to sort of open up the ads API. But really the fundamental difference is that Facebook, when they opened up mobile revenues and they announced, this from $0 to $1 billion, and then they went to $6 billion a quarter, they were able to figure out how to monetize that audience in a novel way. And Google, similarly, with AdWords, there was never search advertising in that way. And you could just go into Google, set up an AdWords or AdSense account, and instantaneously start to buy it. And they were able to sort of harness the entire desire to basically buy online advertising and do so in a really easy to use front-end interface. So that to me, that's the win. That's the change, the pivot that both those companies did that enabled them to be where they are today. And it's not necessarily just because they had the search bar or that they actually had the social network that had lots of usage. It was that they actually built these other pieces of technology that are not really all that well understood or well, highly visible, but they're the things that really made those businesses what they are.
Okay.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is all of that comes with great user experience. And I think that Facebook has really nailed the user experience that their users are looking for when they come in and log into Facebook every day, and they've stayed one step ahead of the curve. I think Twitter struggles with that sometimes.
I think there's a question over here. Yes, young man.
Oh, great. So this is for Jessica. I'm curious, and I just looked at your website this morning. It's been a long day, but I'm curious in terms of your business model, how you see yourself. Are you a provider of B2B services using white label games, or are you a producer of the intellectual property of the games themselves? Like, can you just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I would say a little bit of both. So, we ultimately make our products for end users, but we market them to end users via our partners. So, I guess similar to your business, we work on a revenue share basis with our partners. And rather than go out and do the marketing ourselves to get users to interact with our content, we're lucky enough to be able to do that through places like the Washington Post and the LA Times and Microsoft and CNN. So, we are definitely more of a B2B business than a B2C business, but I would say we are a B2C via B2B business.
My question is from when you were right at the beginning of your startups, especially going into a field that, or in a world that wasn't yet developed, that you saw a vision for something that was new. Before that there was this universal uptake of what each of you were doing, how did you get your first customers? Like, you knew that you had something, but how did you get into the market?
Gave it away for free. Gave it away for free. So it's amazing how many no's you can get with a product that you actually give away for free. But we got a lot of them. And then finally somebody said yes. And then that was all we needed to get the traction to get more people and then to start charging those people. But sometimes at the beginning, it's really hard when you don't have a track record and you don't have case studies and you don't have a client list and you don't have live, demos and live environments to get that first customer. So we did whatever we could to get them.
On that note, if you're interested afterwards, I will give my stuff away to both of you for free, or anyone in this room.
Love free stuff.
Yes, I believe you were. But we'll take your question here.
Thank you very much again, both of you, for taking the time. Are both of your revenue models based in U.S. dollars? Are you getting the majority of your money in the U.S.? And if that changes, would you leave the United States?
It's a good question. Well, we get different currencies. We get a lot of Canadian dollars. We get a lot of pounds, and we're starting to get more euros. We've created subsidiaries, and we have bank accounts in offshore locations, and basically the currency goes to those locations, and we keep that money offshore to fuel the growth of those entities that are offshore, because they're going to need capital to actually grow the company. And so it's better for us to leave it there based on the tax rates there, especially if we're going to have to, starting up London, for example, it's a loss leader at the beginning, right? We have 9 employees there. They're not making any money. So basically, I'm very positively sending money at a 1.3 to 1 exchange rate to the pound. So thank you, Brexit. So I can fund.
For now, right?
For now, at least. Although I like the idea of them actually having to keep me there, and so we'll see how the favorable tax treatment takes place.
Yeah.
But we're a few years away from that. But for the moment, it's basically it's a cost center. So we send money there, and so whatever revenue that they generate there, obviously we would like to leave it there so we don't have to actually take more of our U.S. currency and deploy it overseas. We'd rather them make money and leave it offshore. And then at some point we'll look, if it starts to become profitable like the U.S., we'll look at what we do there and maybe bring it back here. But still the majority of our revenues are generated here in the U.S. So I don't have that.
Jessica, what do you do with currency?
Yeah, 99% of our revenues are U.S. based, and I pay a lot of tax, which I think as a profitable company is not a bad thing. It's just, it means you're profitable. You pay taxes.
And
So-
but most of your employees are in Russia, so you exchange
Yeah,
to
I mean,
rubles.
so we pay them in U.S. dollars.
in US dollars, okay.
Yeah, which is their choice, by the way. But yeah, it's not a complicated tax situation for us because we're not taking rubles, for example, being paid in rubles and then bringing it to the United States and being taxed on it.
All right, good question. Yes. Wait, sorry. I'll get to you next, sorry.
You mentioned that when you were starting out, it was obvious to you that mobile was going to be a big thing, and that's why you did it. I was wondering your prediction over the next 3 years, what's going to be the obvious thing that we look back on and everyone should think about today?
That's a good question.
And are you going to tell us, is the other question.
Well, I think the mobile phone will continue to be, a driver of a lot of the changes in the economy. I think that device, as the device, will probably still be a really interesting device. Where we will start seeing changes, I think, around messaging and what's happened in China with WeChat and commerce. I've never seen anything like it. And that really hasn't started here. You can basically interact with a bot, and it has all of your personal data saved, and you can just be like, I'm hungry, I want dinner, and it shows up. And it's a little bit like the Domino's, where you can send the pizza icon to the Domino's SMS, and if you've already set up your account, pizza's delivered. It's sort of the start of that. I think that's really exciting. So many people around me are really bullish on augmented reality and virtual reality, and I got to play with it a little bit, and it's interesting. But bulky headsets, to use it, seems to me not quite the human condition yet. So I'm not as bullish as the people around me in terms of sort of using VR as a primary way to drive your life. And I think voice is really interesting as well. Alexa and what Amazon is doing to sort of reorder things in the home, and that coming to sort of vehicles and other things. That could be really interesting and sort of change how you sort of one word buy stuff or refill stuff. The fact that you can just be like, I need more toilet paper, and it shows up, on Amazon Prime 2 days later.
Or via drones.
Or via drones. That's pretty interesting, I think. The one thing that I would always say is that it's pretty obvious, saying the mobile phone is going to be important is even back in 1999, it's pretty obvious. You don't know when, but it's going to happen. drones delivering stuff sort of feels pretty obvious. Maybe there's some FTC, the FAA problems in terms of having these drones and crashes and stuff like that. But it seems pretty obvious. I think driverless cars at this point seems like it's gonna happen with what's happening.
In your sphere, Jessica, what's the thing?
So the big investments in my sphere are all in VR and AR.
Do you agree then with Harry that it feels a little odd?
I do. I'm more excited about AR than I am about VR. And I think that AR is really going to change the way people live their lives in the next 5 to 10 years. And I think VR will become a big thing that, for healing and hospitals, for travel. I mean, there's so many different applications for it. I just don't see it being as pervasive in the next 5 to 10 years, maybe.
Will it be something Silicon Valley can accomplish at that point, or will you need real specialists again? Will it be back to the era of needing the specialists?
Well, I mean, the specialists are so well funded at this point. I can't imagine.
Yeah.
I'm sure the tool set will exist for other people to get into it, but that's many years away.
Oh, and by the way, when I said Silicon Valley, I meant the ecosystem, not just
Like Magic Leap's in Florida, and they're like one of the crazy well-funded.
500 or 600 million in funding. Yeah.
There was a question right here,
What are your thoughts on founding a company with friends and family?
You can take this one.
Worked out well for me.
Do you have any anymore?
Yeah. I often get, and I'm sure Kenny does too, people, I don't know why they think that it's appropriate to say this, but people will come up to me and say, God, I can never build a company with my wife, or like I could never work with my husband. And I'm sure it wouldn't work for a lot of people. I feel really, really privileged to have built my company with my husband, because until you've done it, you don't realize how much pressure there is and how difficult it is, and how very few people, if anyone in the world around you, understands what you're going through. So to have that be someone who you share your life with, I think is an incredible gift. I know it doesn't work for everybody, but I do think that, and I won't have the stats off the top of my head, but family-run and family-founded businesses tend to outperform quote-unquote traditionally founded businesses. So it's worked for me, and I can only speak from my own experience.
Taking money from family and friends?
Taking money from family and friends is dicey. I think
that you have to do it. They're the only ones that are going to really believe in you.
Initially, you have to do it. I think as you get outside of kind of very close parents and people who really don't care when they give you the $2,000 if they're ever going to get it back again or not. When you get into bigger numbers, or where you get into people who are outside maybe the nuclear family, or the relationships are different, papering that stuff is really, really important, because otherwise you just, I think, really damage relationships, or have the opportunity to.
Okay, great question as well. Anybody else? Yes.
Thank you. This is for Jessica Rovello. You said you provided the product for free, and I'm curious to learn how long. I'm the co-founder of a technology company. We're out of NYU, and they always told us, hey, you have to have a receipt. Even if it's like $1, you have to charge them. That's what has been told, but like, how long can you keep it until you like build the perceived value or see the metrics? What is your take on that?
I never asked myself that question when I was doing it, so it's an interesting question. I never had professors to tell me, take $1. So for us, it was really, how long can we keep going was the question, right? And it was, how long can we go with, not being able to go out to dinner, and not being able to go to the movies, not being able to, do all the things that you like to do when you're young. I think that if we had gotten to a point within 6 months from giving away the product for free, where we had case studies and we had live demos and people were still unwilling to pay for it, that would be a problem. It was very soon after that first or second kind of giveaway that we were able to charge. So I never had to run into the scenario where people were just unwilling. It was just that to get the foot in the door, we needed to be able to give it away. You just need to get the foot in the door. But I wouldn't make a business model out of giving your stuff away for free.
Or if you do, you should think about it in this way. I love the idea of razor and razor blades. And maybe you give the razor away at the beginning, but you need the blades, and you charge for the blades, and maybe it comes with 2 blades at the beginning. So yeah, they can shave their face twice, and then the third time they got to come back to you and actually start paying. And so to the degree that you can figure out a business model around what you're giving away that requires them to come back at some point, and then they either need support or they want you to come in and help them with something or whatever, you'd be like, oh, well, I could come one more time, but after that, we have to do this. And then the one more time happens, you're like, okay, this is the last time. And then they
But
come
you have
the
to
third
mean
time.
it.
But, and then the third time, you're just like, okay. And that's really when you know that your product's has become, it has to be a good enough product that they're willing to pay for it. A lot of people will take free stuff and then basically undervalue or not value it. So the goal is that you have to have a good enough product that when people get the free thing, then they want it again, and they're willing to pay for it that second time.
All right. Yes.
Both gaming and mobile are big things in Asia. For example, recently, EdTech, a lot of acquisitions going on, especially from China. So what are your Asian plans or nothing? Thank you.
Mine's short. I don't have any Asian plans. Yeah, not right now. Partially because we exited, the mobile app business, and because our experience there. I think if you're not set up to do business in Asia properly, if you don't know the ropes, if you haven't been doing it, or have somebody who's representing you there who really knows the ins and the outs of all of the carriers and all of the stores, and you're just setting yourself up for failure. So it's not something we're pursuing right now.
What about you, Harry?
Well, we're in Europe, and the guy who runs Europe is actually our sort of general manager of worldwide, and he has aspirations to drive us across most of Central Europe this year. We have aspirations to be in Singapore and Australia, probably in 2017, but depends on how well Europe goes, and so that might push off to 2018. That being said, I've spent some time with the guys at Tencent and Alibaba, and really sort of starting to get, at least from an education perspective, familiar so that it's not a completely unknown market. I think is probably a smart thing to do, especially given, as you alluded to, some of the recent acquisition activity coming out of Asia. I mean, people don't know it. Ad tech, as depressed as it is, it seems like China actually values ad tech at extraordinary multiples. And so there's been 2 recent acquisitions, one of Media.net and the other of I think it's called App. I don't even remember what the name of it is. AppLovin. And AppLovin was acquired for $1.4 billion. And there hasn't been ad tech valuations even close to that recently. So it's exciting that there are new buyers coming into the market. And that will hopefully put some pressure on the US buyers to actually reevaluate the space.
We've gone a little bit over, not too much over, I hope, for everybody's taste. Please do come back and join us next time there's a Cornell Tech at Bloomberg event. Jessica Rovello and Harry Kargman, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.